So Ron and I were out fishing a few weeks back. Just the two of us one early morning, and at some point, Ron got quiet for a minute. Then he said something that I've been thinking about ever since. He said, "You know what I keep coming back to, Ed? My father worked his whole life being careful with money. Always said he didn't want to be a burden on anyone. Wouldn't spend on himself, wouldn't take the trips he talked about. Always said there'd be time for that later." He paused. Then he said, "When he died, there was more sitting in those accounts than any of us expected." And I just kept thinking, he could have done it. The money was there the whole time. He just never let himself use it. And we sat there for a minute without saying anything, because I recognized what Ron was describing, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't see traces of it in myself. That fear, the fear of spending down what you worked so hard to build, is one of the most common things that happens to men in retirement, and most people never name it for what it is. So today I want to name it, and I want to show you the data that explains why it costs men something real. By the way, if you want to see more videos like this, quickly hit the subscribe button right now and ring the notification bell. We don't lecture here, just real talk from guys like you living it. Okay, so let me start with the study. JP Morgan analyzed 31,000 data points from the Employee Benefit Research Institute, data collected between 2013 and 2018, looking specifically at how retirees actually withdraw from their retirement accounts. And here's what they found. 84% of retirees withdrawing from defined contribution accounts, 401ks, traditional IRAs, all of it, took only the required minimum distribution and nothing more. And of that group, 80% waited until they were legally required to take anything at all before touching the accounts. So we're talking about men who spent decades building these accounts, arrived at retirement, and then essentially sat on them, taking the bare minimum, driven not by a deliberate strategy but by a fear of running out, a fear of spending the principal, a fear of watching the number go the wrong direction. And that fear is completely understandable. But here's the problem with it. It creates a mismatch between when the money peaks and when the man can actually use it. And that mismatch is the most important thing I want to show you today. So let me walk through a simple model. And I want to be clear up front. You don't need to be a numbers person for this to land, because the math is simple and what matters is what the picture shows you. Start with $100,000 in a traditional IRA. You can scale that up or down based on your own situation. It's a round number and it makes the model easy to follow. Now, let's say you do what 84% of retirees do and take only the required minimum distribution every year. At 73, the first RMD is your account balance divided by a life expectancy factor of 26.5. So, on $100,000, that's roughly $3,770. At 74, the factor drops to 25.5, which means a slightly larger distribution, and it continues that way. Every year, the factor gets smaller and the distribution gets a little bigger. Now, here's what the model shows when you run it at a conservative 4.6% return. Roughly what a 30-year U.S. Treasury bond was yielding recently. Your peak distribution under the RMD approach arrives somewhere in your mid-90s. That's when the account is finally producing its largest annual distribution. That's when, according to the math, you'd be spending the most. And here's the thing worth sitting with, honestly. What does a man's life look like in his mid-90s? For most men by that point, the big trips are long over. The physical energy to travel, to stay active, to pursue the things that made retirement exciting in the first place, that's been declining for years. Ron's father is the picture. He lived carefully his whole retirement, took the minimum. It kept the accounts growing, and the money peaked right around the time he could barely leave his neighborhood. The money was ready to be used long before his body was done with it. Now, you see, this isn't just about spending more. It's about understanding how retirement actually works across time. And there's a framework I find genuinely useful for thinking about this. Retirement researchers talk about three distinct phases of retirement spending. The first phase is what some people call the go-go years, roughly from retirement, wherever that starts for you, through your mid-70s. This is when health and energy are largely intact, and you can still travel, still take the experiences you've been telling yourself you'd get to someday, still be fully physically present for the things that matter. All right, the go-go years are when the money has the highest return, not financially, but experientially, because every dollar you spend in this phase buys something that's still fully available to you. The second phase is the slow-go years, roughly 75 to 85, though it varies person to person. Spending naturally contracts here. The big trips become less frequent. The adventures get closer to home, and the pleasures shift. Grandkids, familiar places, the people nearby. And the data shows that spending actually declines in this phase on its own. Most retirees don't have to force themselves to spend less. It just naturally happens as energy and mobility shift. The third phase is the no-go years, 85 and beyond, when healthcare becomes the primary spending category and the discretionary spending on travel, dining out, gas, and experiences has largely stopped on its own. Now, here's the problem with the RMD approach. It treats all three of those phases identically. It doesn't front-load spending in the go-go years when the body can still use it, and it doesn't account for the natural decline in spending that happens through the slow-go and no-go years. It just takes the minimum every single year, regardless of what phase you're in or whether you actually need more right now and will naturally need less later. And the result, as the JP Morgan model shows, is peak spending in the no-go years, which is exactly backwards from where it should be. All right, so what does a better approach actually look like? And I want to be careful here about what I'm saying. This is not a call to spend recklessly or ignore longevity risk. The fear that drives most men toward the minimum is completely rational. Running out of money in your 80s is a real problem that deserves real planning. What I am saying is that the question worth asking every year is not just, am I taking too much, but also, am I taking too little? Because underspending your retirement is also a mistake, just a quieter one. Nobody sends you a bill for it. Your kids might thank you for it. But the life you could have lived, the trips, the experiences, the generosity while you were still there to see the reaction, those don't come back. So here's how to think about this more deliberately. Your RMD is the legal minimum the IRS requires you to take. It is a tax rule, not a spending recommendation, and not a financial plan. And for a man who has other income coming in, Social Security, to part-time work, a pension, the RMD on its own may be far less than what he could comfortably spend without any meaningful risk of running short. So look at your full income picture honestly and ask, given what's coming in and what I actually spend, am I leaving money in the account out of strategy or out of habit? Now, here's where Roth accounts come into this conversation, because Roth IRAs have no required minimum distributions during your lifetime. The IRS never forces you to take anything out, and that's a blessing for tax purposes. But it can also become the same trap in a different wrapper. A man with a large Roth balance and no RMD requirement can go years, decades, without ever asking himself whether he's spending enough from it, because there's no annual reminder, no mandatory distribution to at least prompt the question. So, if you have a Roth IRA, build the habit of reviewing it deliberately every year and asking the same question you'd ask about the traditional IRA. Am I using this, and am I spending in the phase where my body can actually enjoy what the money buys? The Roth is powerful precisely because it gives you control. And control requires intention, or it just becomes another account you're afraid to touch. The third thing is what I think of as the annual honesty question. Every year when I sit down with Frank, and I've started doing this specifically because of what Ron said on that fishing trip, I ask him one question that I didn't used to ask. I say, Frank, am I underspending? And here's what that conversation looks like. Frank looks at my income, my withdrawals, my account balances, and my actual spending. On one hand, if the accounts are growing faster than the spending is drawing them down, if there's a consistent widening gap between what's coming in and what's going out, that tells me one of two things. Either I'm building a deliberate financial legacy, which is a perfectly fine choice if it's made consciously, or I'm accumulating by default, living smaller than I need to out of a fear I've never examined closely enough. Ron's father was in that second group, and it wasn't a choice he made deliberately, it was just habit. And the money he left behind, as meaningful as it was, couldn't buy back the trips he didn't take. The required minimum distribution is a floor, but legal minimum. And it is not a ceiling on what you're allowed to spend. And the research is pretty clear about what happens when retirees treat the floor like a ceiling. They arrive at the phases of retirement where spending drops naturally and they've never spent in the phase where they could have. So protect the go-go years in your financial plan. Front load the experiences while the body can still enjoy them. Take the trip while it's still available to you. Give while you're still there to see what it means to the people you're giving to. Ron said something else on that fishing trip that stayed with me. He said, I think my dad thought the money was the point, but it was never the money. It was what the money was supposed to make possible, and he never quite made that jump. And I think about that a lot because the money is a tool. It's a means to something, and the job in retirement is to use it well, thoughtfully, and deliberately with eyes open to how much time is actually available, before the slow-go years arrive on their own. And look, if any of this brought up questions about your own situation, drop them in the comments or send me an email. I read them. And when something keeps coming up that I think a lot of men are sitting with, I make a video about it. So ask. And if today gave you something to think about, share this with someone who needs to hear it. Because a lot of men are protecting their retirement, they're not quite letting themselves live. And if you're not already part of this community, come join us. Because this is what we do here. Real conversations, real numbers, from guys who are actually living it. Hit the subscribe button and ring the notification bell. See you in the next one.